We start off with our prayer, as usual. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together in our studies with great energy. May our study lead to illumination. And may we not unnecessarily disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is a question and answer session, spiritual seekers. And so I'm going to mute my microphone while you formulate some questions, and then hopefully I'll have some answers formulated as well. So I'm going to do exactly that.
Maybe I can ask if it is possible. So I would like to ask some translation and some insights about Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, this sentence of Yoga Sutras.
So thank you for that question. I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to ask a question or answer a question with a question and ask you, why are you asking?
I would like to know the Advaita Vedanta vision of this sentence.
Okay.
So
well, to start with, I need to point out one thing, and that is that the yoga philosophy as contained in Patanjali Yoga Sutras is a dualistic philosophy. And it comes with a twin, that is Sankhya. They are both dualistic philosophies. So Sankhya is a little bit more atheistic than yoga. But you see, when Patanjali mentions yoga in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras and in his whole philosophy, he's really referring to concentration of the highest type. And where non-dualism comes in, Advaita comes in, is that this dualism leads to this state of pure union. And that kind of yoga is entirely non-dualistic. Non-dualism as a realization, there is only one thing. Now, why don't we say monism? We don't say monism because it infers a numeracy. But this is beyond any numerical thing, because it's beyond any parts that can be enumerated, it's beyond any units. And so, if we are dealing with the second sutra, which is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, we have to go back one step and look at the very first sutra. The very first sutra is telling us Atta Yoga Anushasana. Atta Yoga Anushasana. Now yoga is being explained. Now all the commentaries will tell us, what do we mean by yoga? And when I say commentaries, I'm referring principally to Vyasa's commentary and the Vachaspati gloss, which goes with it. And there it means that previously this subject has been explained, but now we're going to explain it maybe from a new direction and maybe in a better way, a more contemporary way. No point in teaching something which is of the past and misunderstood unless we bring it up to date. So all of the sutra literature, including the Brahma Sutras, begin with this atta, now. Not then, but now. Let's have our attention now. And to me, this word atta, now, also indicates where our attention should be. It should be centered in now. And that is where we find the highest. Now, in order to understand this second sutra, which is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, we have to look at it from, firstly, a dualistic point of view, which is purely a psychological point of view. It is the geography of what is the mind. Because we have to explain the word chitta. What is chitta? We have to explain what is vritti. We have to explain what is nirodha. We have to explain what is yoga. In other words, we have to explain each one of these words. Why? Because Yoga Sutra, or any sutra literature, is exactly that. Sutra means a thread, an aphorism. It's something that's not well explained if you just read it. So why was it laid out in this kind of form? Laid out in this form because when teaching somebody, we can teach a whole subject, but if there's a trigger phrase that helps a student remember it, a mere thread, an aphorism, we don't have to go through the whole discussion. You can then recall everything we ever discussed under that subject, under those few words. So sutra means a word, a few words, that by themselves have no meaning. Only with a living commentator will you get the meaning, will catch the meaning. And I'm glad you raised this question because this is one of the most misunderstood sutras. Let me give you the misunderstood reading of it. So what is yoga? What is concentration? What is meditation? Because all of these are synonymous terms in this context. Yoga coming from a root, yaj and yajya, meaning joining and concentration. And concentration and joining is the same thing. We are joining our attention toward the object of our attention. But you see, it's misunderstood as keeping the mind blank. And this is a whole treatise on meditation, and therefore as a process, and therefore we have to knock this misunderstanding, this misinterpretation out straight away. Meditation is not keeping the mind blank. So if you want to understand what this sutra is saying in translation, we can take it like this, that it is restraining the mind stuff from taking various forms. Yoga is the restraining the mind stuff called chitta from taking various vrittis, forms. And if you take it in a shortcut way, you'll misunderstand it. What do I mean by shortcut way? The whole essence of the steps toward the process of meditation is laid out in 8 limbs. It's called Ashtanga. I know Ashtanga is now used for some form of Hatha Yoga, but this is the meaning. Ashtanga means 8 limbs in meditation, 8 steps, if you will, on a ladder toward meditation. And as you know, it's not possible to step on number 7 without going to number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. Because that would be a modern way of saying, give me a result, give me now. Because in this world, we have instant everything. We have instant coffee. And we want also instant meditation, instant enlightenment. So let's have it. So we need to understand what this means, and we need to understand it with the benefit of the way that the Sankhya philosophers understand the geography of the mind. First of all, the mind and the body are not seen to be in any way separate. Let's take this view to start with. The body is a series of concretized waves, and the mind is a series of subtle waves. So the mind can be compared to something like a lake. And in this lake, you'll find various waves. You must have noticed how thoughts come in waves. You can trace them. They have a beginning, they have an apex, they have an end, followed by another one. And you'll also notice that when the end is there, there's a small gap, a hollow, before another wave arises. The problem is when we identify with the wave. Swami Vivekananda gives a wonderful example that if your wave of anger starts coming along, at its peak, you now forget about the observation of something coming along. You now identify it. I am angry. So I am now that. Naturally, I can't control it if I identify with it. As long as I'm not identifying myself with a gear stick in a car, I know I'm not the gear stick. Chitta is a term that means a kind of inward consciousness, an area of consciousness, a field of consciousness. It is similar to, in the analogy, to a lake. And vrittis will be disturbances in the lake. And the truth of the matter is that if we want to see what is at the bottom of the lake compared to our innermost nature, then what we have to do is we have to make sure that the vrittis are settled nicely. That is the meaning of this, restraining these waves within the context of chitta. Now, just to elucidate further, I'm going to read and comment as I read Swami Vivekananda's commentary on this sutra. Having said that yoga is restraining the mind of chitta from taking various forms of vrittis, he gives this commentary. He says a good deal of explanation is necessary here. And he says we have to understand what chitta is, what the vrittis are. I have eyes, eyes do not see. So the first understanding of this thing that we call the mental field or the mind or the chitta is the first waves that erupt have to be understood. And the first waves that erupt are called indriyas, that is, sense organs. Now you think that the sense organs are on the outside of the skin, eyes, ears, etc. And of course, these are certainly instruments. There are instruments and there are organs. But it's not the eyes that see, Swami Vivekananda points out, because if you take away the eyes, then the brain center which enables seeing is still there. We seem to have two sets of eyes, the outer eye and the inner eye. And when we close the outer eye, the inner eye still sees things. If I say elephant, it's because you saw an elephant, I pointed out to you, let's say in a park. And then later I'll say, can you remember this elephant? Immediately there is a picture of an elephant constructed in what we call the mind. Now, it's not that an elephant got stuffed into your head. It's that there is a subtle form of it, which we call nam, a word. Word and concept are the same thing. You cannot dissociate one from the other. As soon as I say, do not think of an elephant, the first thing you have to do is think of an elephant. You can't avoid it. The word and the concept are intrinsically joined. So he says, take away the brain center which is in the head. The eyes will still be there. The retina complete, as also the pictures of objects on them. Yet the eyes will not see. So the eyes are only a secondary instrument. Same thing with the ears and so on. Because when you sleep, I can open your eyelid and your eyeball will stare out at me and you won't see a thing. It requires something else to enable seeing. And that connection, that attention is necessary. That's an inward thing. So he says like this, the pictures of objects on them, and yet the eyes will not see. So the eyes are only secondary instrument, not the organ of vision. The organ of vision is in a nerve center, he says, of the brain. The two eyes will not be sufficient. Sometimes a man is asleep with his eyes open. The light is there, the picture is there, but a third thing is necessary. The mind must be joined to the organ. The eye is the external instrument, And we need also the brain. This brain center, it has to be there, but also the agency of the mind. Now he mentions carriages, we have to update it. Cars. Cars roll down a street, don't forget, he wrote this 1895, I think it was, something like that. So carriages, he says, but cars can be passing the street, motorbikes and so on and so forth, and you don't hear them. Why? Because your mind has not attached itself to the organ of hearing, because it's preoccupied with something else. So first there is this instrument, then there is the organ, and the third, the mind attached to both of these two. The mind takes the impression further in and presents it to the determinative faculty. So let us see what we have so far in the geography of the psyche. So we have the external organs, we have the internal organs. The internal organs now form part of this mental field. And then those internal organs are hooked into what is generally called mind in this sense. We call it manasa. So there is everything else, all the things that are going on, and then that has to be reported to the buddhi. Buddhi is the intellect. It's a determinative faculty, and that reacts. And along with the reaction flashes the idea of ownership, egoism. It belongs to me. And the mixture of action and reaction is presented to the Purusha. Purusha is the yogic term that Vedanta calls Atman. So the soul who perceives an object in this mixture is called the Purusha. The organs, that is the Indriyas, together with the mind, Manas, the determinative faculty, Buddhi, and egoism called Ahamkara, form the group called the Antakarana. Now let's rephrase things. We're not talking of the mind. That's confusing. We're talking of an internal instrument. That's a much better way of thinking. Let's revalue the whole thing now in the context of non-dualism. What is the body? The body is the external instrument. What is the mind? The mind is the antakarana, the internal instrument. You can compare it to a car, of course. What is the external thing? Well, it's the body of the car. What is the interior of it? Well, there's an interior of the body, upholstery and so on. But then there is the engine of the car, comparable to the internal instrument. Now I'm laboring this point instrument because this is not you. And this instrument combined of senses, internal senses, mind, and also buddhi, determinative faculty, and then egoism, these factors make up what we call the internal instrument, antakarana. And there are but various processes in the mind stuff, and the mind stuff itself is called chitta. Now, there's a very interesting, famous neuroscientist, and I actually always forget her name, unfortunately. But of course, there's a great deal of investigation into the idea of what is consciousness. And can we view it? Can we see where it arises in the brain? Now, we make a distinction because in this antakarana, it's very clear that there are some subtleties which we won't find in the physiology of the brain. But we won't argue about it, since what we call mind and what we call matter are both forms of material things. They're both reliant on food, and they're both waves, if you like. And chitta is an environment for these waves. Chitta is this consciousness, which is the whole thing. And so this researcher came to this conclusion because investigators are trying to find where is the location specifically in the brain where consciousness arises. Consciousness means awareness, generally speaking. And also that includes self-awareness. Where does it arise from? What part of the brain is it coming from? Because a man called David Chalmers, a kind of neuroscience philosopher, will bring this question up. Consciousness is the hard problem, and the whole of the scientific community has taken this up. We know most things, but this question of consciousness is a difficult question, particularly in the light of physics. Because in 20th century, 21st century physics, the observer is a critical aspect of the physics. Prior to that, it wasn't important. But now it's a critical aspect of it. And is it then a conscious observer? You can't have an unconscious observer. So Swami Vivekananda continues. The waves of thought in the chitta, these are called vrittis. Literally, the meaning is literally whirlpools. You can imagine a kind of river, and there are whirlpools within it. It's flowing, but there are whirlpools, eddies, currents, and so on. Waves are not standard waves. They vary. They're not all the same. And depending on how they form, when they form, and other factors, you'll see they form small whirlpools or currents or eddies. So what is thought? Thought is a force. Now he's saying force because in those days they really didn't have a word for energy. In science, that is. Of course, the yogis had it already, this term energy. So he's using a term that is comprehensible to his listeners or his readers. So he says thought is a force. We can say thought is an energy, as is gravitation or repulsion. Now we can expand on that because we can take energy and we can see that it is in the form of gravitational energy or potential energy, kinetic energy, which is dispersive. We can see that the effect of gravity on subatomic molecules, even let's say hydrogen and helium molecules, will squeeze them into space, and that will create a kind of radiation. That's also a kind of energy. And then with the whole thing, there's electromagnetism as well. So there's gravitation on the one side and there's repulsion on the other side, what we now call electrical energy. The whole universe is a tug of war between these two things. Gravitation pulling things in, electrical energy pulling things out, and they're equal. Now, from the infinite storehouse of force, and I'm going to replace it by the word energy in nature, the instrument called chitta takes hold of some, absorbs it, and sends it out as thought. Now we have to think about this very carefully, using the very thought that he's mentioning. So the instrument called chitta takes hold of some of this universal energy, absorbs it, and sends it out as subtle energy called thought. Thought is the subtlest of all energy. In a separate chapter in this Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda has it as psychic energy, psychic prana. Prana being a term for this energy, this force. And this force or this energy is supplied to us. How? It's supplied to us through food. There's an example in the Chandogya Upanishad, and the student is asked to recite some passages, and then he's asked to fast. And then after fasting for some time, he's then asked to, please can you repeat all the things you memorized previously? He can't do it. He says, yes, you see, the mind requires food. It's made from food. And so out of that food, the body gets the power of motion, what we call metabolism, metabolizes it into physical energy. And others, that is the finer forces, it throws out in what we call thought. So we see that the mind is not intelligent itself, it's just a material thing, yet it appears to be intelligent. The mind also is made from food, and the body also is made from food. And why is this in lack of intelligence present? He says, because the intelligent soul is behind it. What has this got to do then with non-dualistic philosophy? We have to see that Advaita, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, these are not separate things. These are developments, these are points of view, and probably necessary in our understanding. We have to go from one to the other to the other. And so very rare souls will be able to jump completely to the top. These are jnana yogis, and these are people of astute discernment and a great deal of astuteness in their knowledge and in their occupation, and are able to dedicate their whole life to renunciation, specific practice of steering the mind in this way, meditation, if you will. So Swami Vivekananda says, you are the only sentient being. Mind is only the instrument through which you can catch the external world. Why does this external world exist? Well, it's because there is an instrument that takes this and interprets it and projects it. That is called mind. Let us take the non-dualistic point of view. What we see in front is mithya, that is, it is nothing more than the divine, seemingly fragmented. The non-dualistic way of looking at things will be exactly this: a seemingly fragmented divinity. What will the duists think of it? How will they view it? Well, they'll view it as a series of waves, within which is a Purusha. This Purusha, this self, is the Atman of the non-dualist, which is identical with Brahman. This is where the non-dualism is just a final conclusion of the same thing. So let us now go on and understand a little bit more. So take a book, any book. Well, we can take this book, for example. It doesn't exist outside. What exists outside is unknown and unknowable. And those who study Germanic philosophy will see, this is exactly Immanuel Kant. This is a form of idealism. The unknowable furnishes the suggestion that gives a blow to the mind, and the mind gives out the reaction in the form of a book. In the same way as when a stone is thrown into the water. What an interesting analogy. And I say it's interesting because the scientist, and I'll have to really remember her name, I'll get it shortly, says, I cannot locate consciousness here or there within the brain because this instrumentation which catches the microscopic aspect of the brain activity and not the whole thing. And then when you look at the whole thing, you don't catch the specifics. I've come to this conclusion. It's like a lake. If you throw a stone in from outside, it creates ripples. These we call vrittis. Remember? Yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. These are ripples, these are waves. And then when we bring something up from our memory, it's another kind of stone, as you like, being thrown into the lake. So when a stone is thrown into the water is thrown against it in the form of waves. The real universe is the occasion of the reaction of the mind. What is this related to Advaita philosophy? Well, it is not just that there is non-dualism, but what we see as a dualism is mithya. That means it is a play of waves, And these waves subside, they come and go, and they really are illusory in the sense that they are not permanent. And they are compared, if you like, to something like a desert mirage, something that seems to be there, but when you look at it closely, it's not there. Our gut says it's there because that's how we are designed, because the instrumentality that we have will shape it in this way. And that is why there's a confusion when we look at the world, which obeys certain laws, and we can't understand what's going on underneath it. Underneath it is another type of physics, which is all to do with wave systems, if you like, or a kind of quantum foam, if you like. These are various descriptions of the same thing, something where things bubble up and disappear as fast as you can catch it, faster than you can catch it. And they work on laws which are just not the same as the laws of gravitation or general relativity or any of these things, or Newtonian mechanics or any of these things. They're all completely separate. That is why the holy grail today of modern physics is to find out this theory of quantum gravity, where we can reconcile the two things. Let's take cosmology as it's understood at the moment. Not something I agree with necessarily, but it's understood as the contemporary theory. Even they go as far as saying it's the best explanation we have. The best cosmological model. But unfortunately, the whole model breaks down when we come to what is called a singularity, when we reduce everything down, where everything is so hot and dense, and we cannot go lower than that, we cannot go more specific than that, because we're restricted by 10 to the minus 42 seconds, I think it is, of a second, which is the Planck time. Okay, so we don't know what that is, and we can't even visualize such a thing. And within a split second of a second, somehow it inflates to the size of an orange. And then as we go on, you see, over eons, we find what we find here today. So how do you explain this thing where you can't even say there was a beginning? Well, you have to invoke quantum physics, and the quantum physics is not there. The quantum gravity, the reconciliation of these two things is not there. It's absent, irreconcilable at the moment. So this is exactly what the yogis are saying. They're saying a book form or an elephant form or a man form is not outside. All that we know is our mental reaction from the outer suggestion. And then he quotes the famous John Stuart Mill. Matter is the permanent possibility of sensations, says John Stuart Mill. It is only the suggestion that is outside. Take an oyster, for example. He says, you know how pearls are made. A parasite gets inside the shell and causes irritation, and the oyster throws a sort of enameling around it. And this makes the pearl. So the universe of experience, of your experience and my experience, is our own enamel, so to say. And the real universe is the parasite serving as a nucleus. So the ordinary person will never understand this, because when we try to do so, we throw out another enamel and sees only his own enamel. And when we understand what is meant by these vrittis, these waves, these oscillations, these vortexes, these whirlpools, the real man is behind the mind. The mind is the instrument in his hands. It's his intelligence that is percolating through the mind. And it is only when you stand behind the mind that it actually becomes intelligent. And so when a person gives it up, gives this mind up, it falls to pieces and is nothing. And so you understand what is meant by chitta. It is the mind stuff, what we might call the mental field. And vrittis are the waves and ripples arising in it when external causes impinge on it. And it is these vrittis that are the universe. And so when they are calmed to the extent that they are no longer there, we are able to observe the truth. That is the whole purpose of meditation. And that is what is meant by this yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And so we use the analogy of the lake again. The bottom of a lake we can't see because its surface is covered with ripples. It's only possible for us to catch a glimpse of the bottom. When the ripples have subsided and the water is calm, if the water is muddy or is agitated all the time, the bottom will not be seen. If it's clear, there are no waves, we shall see the bottom. The bottom of the lake is our own true self. The lake is the chitta, and the waves are the vrittis. And again, the mind is in the three states. So these vrittis are actually, although they're fivefold in nature. What are these fivefold natures of these vrittis? Well, it is true knowledge. True knowledge. It is false knowledge. It is memory. It is sleep. And it is a kind of projection that we have, which is verbal delusion. In other words, we imagine something and we jump to a conclusion. These are the five waves. Now, coincidentally, if you study the actual physical waves of the brain, beta, delta, etc., you'll see they correspond to these five types of vrittis. But all of them really are classified as three types of waves. Because everything, according to the Sankhya's and the Yogis, and nobody disagrees with them, according to them, everything that we see in the phenomenal world is made from these three components, these three kinds of waves. You have gravitational waves, you have inertia, you have, which are not really waves, but of course they're neutralizing waves of a type, and then you have electrical energy wanting to pull things outwards. These are described variously as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva wants to unite everything, rajas wants to divide and disperse everything, and tamas wants nothing to change at all, just wants to remain there. Now, in the very psyche, in the very mind, the mind being composed of these vrittis or waves, comes in these three varieties, sattva, rajas, and tamas. What is the whole practice of yoga? What is the whole practice of spirituality? What is the whole practice of meditation? It's a game of life where we promote sattva as much as we possibly can, all the higher noble values, in order to neutralize the other waves. In other words, we raise a wave up, we raise a vritti up in order to neutralize the other two. That has the effect of clarifying everything. So we're able to see this Purusha on the bottom. That is our aim. That is where we get our unity of existence and our non-dualistic experience. So he goes on like this. The mind is in three states. He calls them states, which is darkness called tamas, found in brutes and idiots. It only acts to injure. No other idea comes into that state of mind. Then there is the active state of mind called rajas, whose chief motives are power and enjoyment. It goes along with a kind of internal dialogue or monologue. I will be powerful and rule others. And then there's the state called sattva, serenity, calmness, in which the waves cease. That's the important thing. And the water of the mind lake, I should say, becomes clear. This is the game of guiding thought, where we promote sattva at every possible opportunity until it habitually dominates. Then we are able to see our own inner self. We get the revelation of it, the realization of it. Now, it is not inactive, but rather intensely active. It is the greatest manifestation of power to be calm. We rephrase this: meditation is not pushing the mind and thought down and making it inactive. Meditation is a highly active state of bringing sattva out. It's a game of guiding thought. It's easy to be active. Let the reins go and the horses will run away with you. Anyone can do that. But the person who can stop the plunging horses is the strong person. Which requires the greatest strength, letting go or restraining? The calm person is not the person who is dull. You must not mistake the sattva for dullness or laziness. This is often promoted as meditation. I often hear this phrase, Swami, I can't meditate. Why? I can't seem to empty my mind. Who said you should empty your mind? It's not a rubbish bin. It's something that is useful. It's a highly active thing. What you should do is, wherever you notice rajas and tamas, you bring out sattva. Rajas and tamas, sattva. Where you see tamas, put in rajas. Where you see rajas, put in sattva. Play a game like that, shifting gears continuously, from the lowest up to the highest. This is the game of guiding thought, otherwise called meditation, otherwise called game of life in your waking life also. And so, the calm person is the one who has control of the mind waves. This is what is meant by Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Activity is the manifestation of inferior strength and calmness of the superior. The chitta is always trying to get back to its natural pure state. It's a wonderful statement. It is always trying to get back to that. But the organs draw it out. To restrain it, to check this outward tendency, and to start it on the return journey to the essence of intelligence is the first step in yoga. The resolution, all the energy going outward, I'm going to invert inward. So it is the first step in yoga, this return journey, because only in this way can the chitta get into its proper course. And although the chitta is in every being, is in every sentient being, it's in every animal, from the lowest to the very highest, it is really only in the human form that we find it as the intellect, what is called buddhi. That is what we are using right now. We are absorbing these words. We are stirring it around, reflecting on it, reasoning on it a little bit, and then ultimately understanding it. The understanding part is meditation. This only happens through that form of consciousness which you call intellect. It's not possible for it to return through all these steps and liberate the soul. Immediate salvation is impossible for, let us say, the cow or the dog. Although they have mind, because their chitta cannot as yet take the form that we call intellect in the highest sense. And so the chitta manifests itself in the following forms. And the most common form we have is a scattered condition. So it is scattering, it is darkening, it is gathering, one-pointed and concentrated. This is what is behind the whole thing. Now, what are we to do in our spiritual practice? We are to take this scattered condition, we have to gather it, we have to make it one-pointed, and we have to make it concentrated. The scattering form is activity, and its tendency is to manifest in the form of pleasure or of pain, a kind of syndrome, and we go between these two things constantly. And the darkening form is dullness. It tends to injury. And if we were to classify it now, we can say the scattering form, of course, is called rajas. And the darkening form is called tamas. And the commentators on this sutra will say the third form is natural, that is the form of gathering is natural to higher beings. Let us call it, every religion has some supernatural being somewhere, such as devas, angels, and so on. But the first and second is to the demons. That doesn't mean to say beings who are demons. It means those who have a demonic nature, that is, those who have degraded the mind. The gathering form is really when it struggles to center itself. This is where we all are here now if we call ourselves spiritual seekers. And the one-pointed form is when it tries to concentrate. And the concentrated form, that's what brings us to the highest form of concentration, and that is called samadhi. Samadhi really is what is defined here as yoga. And therefore yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. It is not emptying the mind. It's not keeping the mind blank. That's the opposite extreme. And two extremes often look like the same, isn't it? Dullness looks like the same as peace and enlightenment. You see a rock, you see that's very calm and peaceful, but it's not enlightened. Then you see an enlightened person not moving, still, silent, and muni, and you say, well, that is a serene position. Well, the rock is also serene, I suppose. Two extremes look the same thing, look the same. So now we have this commentary, and Swami Vivekananda is gathering the ancient commentators together and presenting what a beautiful summary of it. So let us see the process of our impressions. There's an example given like this. Supposing I'm standing in a field and something I register seems to be there, and my process from memory seems to say, it seems to be running. It's a large object, it seems to be running. Then I see, it's a bull. And then as it's running, it comes in, and my sense of egoism says, it's running toward me. And then my intellect, my buddhi says, you better take some action and find a tree and get up it and stand there. So it's presented in this way. The indriyas present it to the mind. The mind presents it to the intellect. The intellect presents it to, and of course involved in that is the ownership of the ego. The intellect presents it to the real owner, which is Purusha. And then Purusha has this reflected intelligence. And this reflected intelligence goes the other way and gives some action and ends up with the organs of action. Climb a tree. This is the inward and outward process that we're all going through, and it all happens in split seconds. It all happens according to our habit, our instinct, as we call it. But instinct is only learnt behavior over eons of time. Don't think that it is only from birth to now, because according to our biological laws, all of these lessons are learnt way, way back from bacteria already. And what is there in the bacteria is not simply an organic cell, but it is the divine chitta that is restricted in such a way and has not manifested these other varieties, these other aspects of this chitta, that ends up in the highest form of it, namely the intellect. So I hope I answered your question anyway.
Thank you.
Now you have to replay it and make some sense of it. All right. So we have a brief period of time left. So any other questions we can deal with? You see, this is not the normal way that we see our human experience. We interpret it in a different way. We register body and mind as me. That becomes our problem rather than instruments. So as I often repeat, and I'll repeat again, there's the greatest value in relabeling these things. It is not my body, it is a divine temple, an instrument, an external instrument. It is there for self-discovery and for expression of what is discovered. And then, of course, there is the mind, or we evaluate it is the internal instrument. And this internal instrument has to be cleansed. How is it cleansed? We clean it or we clarify it by promoting all the values which are noble values and nothing to do with egoistic positions. Values of strength and beauty and goodness and love and divinity and illumination, all of this illuminating thoughts, that has the effect, that is also vritti, it has the effect of neutralizing these other two types of vrittis, namely, or these two types of behavioral characteristics called rajas and tamas. That's the process. That's the game of life. And if it's a game of life, we should play it well.
Oh. Sorry, Swami. I have a small question.
Yes. Nice to see you.
Thank you. What gives us a sense of solidity if we are just waves? It's because of gravity or energy? Or?
No, what gives us a sense of solidity is the reaction in the mind. Let's go back to what I've just said. We have to take that this world is really the interpretation or the materialization of our reaction to something that is unknown. And the example that given was, here's a book. Well, the book doesn't exist. We think it exists. The book doesn't exist. It is only that there is something here, and that gives rise to a reaction in the mind. It is the reaction that makes it a book. Now, this is not how we feel about it, of course. That's how it is. And so we make a mistake. We take it for granted that the so-called external objects are actually the reality. But modern science will tell us something different. And modern science doesn't care about our gut, how we feel inside about it. It only goes according to its equations. There are 3 equations of Maya, but I don't want to make it too complicated. So I'll just briefly mention, I mentioned it multiple times. How we are convinced that this world is purely on an apparitional basis. In other words, these are equations of what we call Maya. In 1905, there was an equation that came out to do with special relativity. It was saying, what is the sum total separation between 2 events? And when we talk about events in a space setting, in other words, objects, well, we have to take dimensions. There are 3 dimensions, length, breadth, height. These are the dimensions. And so we can put these dimensions into one thing and call it space. What is the total time-space separation between 2 events? Well, we take that thing consolidated as dimensional space. But Einstein said, wait a minute. Time is also a dimension. So for the first time, time was viewed instead of something as separate, was viewed, no, it's actually a dimension. And so he puts it as there is space, it's a plus, minus t, which means time. And he also qualifies it in vacua, in a vacuum. In other words, we've got nothing. Because +1, -1, you're not going anywhere. That means the total time-space separation is reduced to an observer. We are the observer, we are the perceiver. There's no difference between anything. That's the first equation of Maya. If you want it written, it's S, that is total time-space separation. You can say it's S squared equals the square root of x minus t. So you only have an observer there. Now, this is not understood and it goes against our gut. But this equation has been used time and time and time again in special relativity, and it all works out, and we have no business to argue with it, even though we don't feel it. Then the next part of our illusion will be that famous thing in the same paper, the most famous equation in the world, I would think. And that is this E equals mc squared. Let's forget about the c squared. But energy is equivalent to matter. Now, what that means, therefore, is that it's only energy. There is nothing more than energy. This is exactly what the yogis are saying. There is only this chitta. That's all there is. It is one energy. And when this chitta is, when this sum total of this energy, when a small section, as it were, is drawn in and becomes our localized version of it called chitta, a wave arises in it. So, but this wave is also a wave of energy. And our interpretation of the world is dependent on it. Our interpretation of the world is wrong. It's functional. It's necessary for us to operate in a relative world. But fundamentally, it's a mistake. And then the third equation then tells us, and that's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It tells us that you cannot, there's whatever is fixed, whatever is at one point, times whatever is moving, the momentum, cannot be the uncertainty of it. I should have rephrased it. The uncertainty of where something is and the uncertainty of how fast it's moving cannot be less or greater. Uncertainty has to be greater than what is called, H, which is, H with the cross is Planck, right? Planck's constant over pi r squared. Don't worry about it. We have to accept it because it's a constant. We don't have to worry about it. In other words, you can't be certain of anything. You can't be certain of where something is and how fast it's moving at the same time. And you cannot know where something is when something is measured as moving and you try to catch its momentum. You cannot catch this energy while at the same time fixing its location. This means that the whole world is based on complete uncertainty, and we can only estimate the probability of something being here or there, or how fast it's going. So these are three equations of Maya, really. And that it says that we can easily take space and time away. We can easily take energy and mass as pairs of opposites, and we can neutralize them because the energy that it takes to wind things in and the energy it takes to wind things out is exactly the same, and we're left with a zero. So if we take all of this away, and if everything is uncertain, what do we have? Well, if you take space away, you have the undivided. If you take time away, you have the unchanging. And if you take all of that away, you have the infinite. if you take the finite possibility, in other words, if you take the certainty away, then you have the uncertainty of infinity. So this is what we call Brahman. And in you it's called Atman, and in the yogic terminology it's called Purusha. Purusha is a curious term. It's derived from the indweller of a city, Puri. And lest you make the mistake of thinking it's something like an encapsulated thing, limited and cannot move, it is also Purna, it is full. In other words, it is everywhere, it's all pervasive. An all pervasive indweller of the city, comprising what? The instrumentality of the antakarana, the internal instrument, and the external instrument called body. And it is only this instrument that makes us see something, the solidity of things. It's like looking at a telescope. You look through a telescope at the stars. Supposing the telescope is the mind. You can look at the telescope, but you can look away from it as well. These are three positions. And we can shift our point of view to experience all of these three positions. There's no such fixed thing as this is a dualistic philosophy. This is a non-dualistic philosophy. So the background to the question originally asked, this yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, how does it relate to non-dualistic philosophy? Well, it relates in steps. It tells us that this world is only our interpretation. It is only the reaction of an occasion for a reaction. Something is outside, it's unknown and unknowable. It's an X, unknown and unknowable. It only becomes known to us through our reaction. It is the reaction that creates the solidity. And actually, that's the bottom line answer to your question. It is our reaction that manufactures the solidity. Then why do we experience the same thing? We have the same instrumentation, that's why. Other beings will interpret it in different ways, of course. So the mind is a kind of fragmenter. It decides to pixelate a totality. And we see the pixelated version and we take it seriously. But we're only seeing the crest of a wave. That's all we're seeing. We're not seeing the ocean. What is our aim? Not only that we should see the ocean, but that we should entrench ourselves, establish ourselves in the being of the ocean. Therein lies our freedom. Well, I think we had enough of me now, so.
Thank you very much, Swami.
Okay, all right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Okay, all good.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Thank you.